we are good to go, then suppose then we can go. Good morning, colleagues and guests on our platform. Today is the 17th of August 2021. This is the Standing Committee on Local Government. Today, the agenda is that we will have a briefing by the Auditor General's Office on the local government audit outcomes of municipalities in the Western Cape for the 2019-2020 financial years, and the third special report on financial management of government's COVID-19 initiatives in municipalities. Thirdly, that's the main item on the agenda, and then we will have committee reports that we will be dealing with thereafter, and then our fourth item on the agenda would be the resolutions of this meeting. My name is Derek America. I'm the chairperson of the committee, and I would like to establish whether we have a quorum for the meeting. All the members who are present on the platform to introduce themselves quickly.
Good morning, Chair. My name is
Makhodi Maseko, member of the Standing Committee.
Thank you. Good morning, Honourable Maseko.
Good morning, Andrikus van der Westhuizen, member of the committee.
Good morning, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Is there any other member present who'd like to introduce him or herself? It doesn't seem as if there are any other members. But nonetheless, we are curated, so the meeting can proceed. I have received apologies from the Minister and the HUD, Mr. Paulse. Both are engaged in the Cabinet Bosberaad. So, Johan, are there any other apologies that I'm not aware of? Johan?
Chairperson, yes.
Are there any other apologies other than the Minister and the head of department?
I have received no other apologies, Chairperson.
Okay, good. Thank you. So, colleagues and guests, this meeting is taking place on the MS Team virtual platform, and I would like to remind members and guests just about the following rules of engagement regarding meetings taking place on this particular platform. So the meeting is also being live fed on YouTube, which any interested person or institutions or stakeholders may tune into to follow the proceedings. Our guests on the platform, other than those who are presenting into the meeting agenda, I would like to request them not to interact, or that meaning participate verbally without being requested to do so by the chairperson. On the platform, we also have technical assistance provided by Candice and Siraj to members who may experience technical difficulties during the course of the meeting. At the start of this meeting, all members were muted, and I urge members to remain muted to eliminate any possible background noises that may interfere in the proceedings. Members who wish to bring any matter to the chairperson's attention are requested to raise the hand function on the platform to alert the chairperson or to pose such a request on the chat function. I would request for smooth operation of the meeting is that all members who are should switch off the videos, and that way to improve the quality of the connections. However, if a member or official is speaking, you may put on the mic and the video. And then I would request, after having spoken, that we disable those two functions. In terms of the maintenance of order and of this meeting, I'd like just to remind members of the directives that was ATC on the 17th of April 2020. That's applicable to this particular meeting. I shall not go into the detail. Members are fully aware of it. And furthermore, unfortunately, we will not have interpreting service available, and it'd be appreciated if English could be used as a medium of communication. So on the platform, and I was notified that we have the Office of the Auditor General that will be represented by Mr. Alkes, who is the Acting Business Unit Leader, Mr. van der Hoven, the Stakeholder Liaison Manager, Mr. Haynes, who's the Acting Deputy Business Unit Leader, Ms. Klue, who's the Acting Business Unit Leader, Mr. Venter, who's the Technical Senior Manager, Mr. Hari Prasad, who's a Technical Senior Manager, Mr. Mbembele, the Stakeholder Liaison Manager's Office, and Mr. Moshlomi, who's the Stakeholder Liaison Manager in the Office of the Manager. From the Local Government Department, I was informed that the following senior staff would be present in the meeting. They would not necessarily participate in the meeting, but there are Ms. Barnett, who is the Chief Director, Municipal Performance Monitoring and Support, Ms. Siwal Singh, who is the Chief Financial Officer, Dr. Grayling, who is the Director, Municipal Support and Capacity Building, and Ms. Rylands, who is the Director, District and Local Performance Monitoring. Having said that, once we start with the briefing of the Auditor General, if need be, then the necessary further introductions could be made in terms of whoever is presenting on that particular area of engagement. Having said that, colleagues, once again, thank you for making the time and being present in the meeting, and for sharing the very important reports that will enable us to perform our oversight duty as efficiently and effectively as possible and assist our municipalities to achieve the best possible outcomes in terms of service delivery. Thank you so much, colleagues and members and officials. I will then proceed to the main item on the agenda, and that is the presentation from the AG's office. So, Johan, I want your assistance here. I don't know who's going to flight the presentations. All members received the presentation, and certainly that wouldn't be a problem. Okay, there we go. I hand over to Mr. Alkes, I think, who's going to lead the presentation, or I don't know, he will direct us. Thank you. I'm going to switch off my video.
Good morning, Chairperson and members of the Standing Committee on Local Government. Yes, I will be leading the presentation of the local government audit outcomes as for the period 2019-2020. So I will be leading this, the presentation, Chair. So thanks for the opportunity once again. So I think we can delve straight into the presentation this morning. If we can get to the next slide, please. Okay. So Chairperson, what this slide entails is basically just an overview of the categories of the audit outcomes during the previous general report. What we've reported in the previous general report, that is the general report for 18-19. So they would see that how we've reported and categorized municipalities would be municipalities that have basically the internal controls or their control environment institutionalized. In other words, these municipalities had, preventative controls basically institutionalized within their control environments, mainly preventative controls. Then you had a second category of municipalities which were more reactive to, detection of errors in their financial processes. And these municipalities were categorized as municipalities that are reactive and susceptible to change. These municipalities are normally those municipalities that move in and out of categories of the clean audit outcome category. So you'll have the municipality 1 year, perhaps in a clean audit or unqualified with no findings category, while in the following year, that municipality, because the preventative controls is not institutionalized in the municipality, might fall back into the unqualified with findings category. The next category that we have in the previous general report is the municipalities that had dysfunctional control environments. So these municipalities were the municipalities that sit in the qualified, audit outcomes or the disclaimed audit outcomes, and there were a few in those categories as well. So those were the overview of the previous general report that we have. If we move to the current cycle, okay, so this is just an overview of the, basically, first of all, the audit outcomes in proportion to your expenditure or your budget that you have on an expenditure level. And the first, row that you will see that's colorful there with the percentages involved is how the picture looks at a national level. So for the 2019-20 period, you would see there was an expenditure budget of about 73 billion nationally. And of that 73 billion, 23% of the municipalities that were, spending some of that 73 billion were in the unqualified with no findings category on a national level. 75% were sitting in the unqualified with findings category. For the Western Cape specifically, you would notice that we've got 3 years presented there, and you would see for the 2019-20 period, for the 30 municipalities that we have in the province, you would see 18 of those municipalities are in the unqualified with no findings category, while 9 sits in the unqualified with findings. 2 were qualified, while 1 of those auditees were a disclaimed auditee. So there has been an improvement from the previous year of more municipalities moving into the unqualified with no findings or the clean audit outcome category. We can go to the next slide. So Chairperson, this slide gives you, we call it the movement slide. So it is just give you an overview of the movement that has happened during the year under review. And with this slide, you would notice that the municipalities that has improved the first into the unqualified with no findings categories, there were a number of them moving into that category. It's the municipalities are listed there. but most notably would be the Central Karoo District Municipality, which achieved their first clean audit outcome, and that I think needs to be applauded for that municipality. So the others had previous clean audit outcomes, but that particular municipality, it was their first clean audit outcome for that particular municipality. And the unchanged for the unqualified with no findings audit outcomes is listed underneath the unchanged, and there was the Burke River municipality, the normal municipalities basically that you would expect to have clean audit outcomes, like your Burke River, there's Cape Winelands, there's Hesse-Quad, Drakensberg, Overstrand, Theewaterskloof, West Coast, Batsenberg, and so on. And then in the unqualified with findings, here we had municipalities that was unchanged from the previous year, included your Bateau municipality, City of Cape Town, Garden Route, and so on. And the one that has regressed from the clean audit outcome category in the previous year to unqualified with findings in this current year is the Cederburg municipality. For the qualified with findings category, for this particular category, Laingsburg remained unchanged, while Kannaland, regressed into this category. Kannaland previously had an unqualified with findings category, and then this claimed municipality, which is also a regression from the previous period under review, would be the Beaufort West municipality, which received a disclaimed audit outcome. Next slide, please. So this slide just gives an overview of the local government finances, the financial health, and the strength of reporting in the area of financial reporting. And you would notice here, Chairperson, that the municipalities overall are experiencing a challenge with regards to collection of their debtors, resulting in creditors being basically payment to creditors being delayed. So due to the fact that municipalities are struggling to collect their debtors. And then also we're indicating there that the equitable share in some instances are mostly used for salaries and remuneration for some of, or for the municipalities, and that only 13% of expenditure goes towards basically maintenance in relation to recoverable revenue and the equitable share for municipalities. In relation to the submission of financial statements, what we're indicating here is that there has been 100% submission of financial statements, and the quality of financial statements for 96% of those auditees were good quality of financial statements that we've basically received. And then the last bit, we're just indicating that what it cost the municipalities' finance units to have a well-run administration within that municipalities that produce the sort of financial reports that we have received from those municipalities. Next slide, please. So in relation to the report on predetermined objectives, or the performance report that we normally call it, or sometimes call it, we're indicating here that similarly to the financial statements, we had 100% submission rate of the report on predetermined objectives or the performance reports, and the quality of submission has deteriorated, or not deteriorated, but it's 65% of those performance reports that we've received were not of the quality that we expected it to be. And then after we've audited those performance reports or audited, we basically indicating that the quality has improved of the published performance reports has improved to 91%. And the main findings that we had is listed there, but it relates basically normally to the achievement of performance indicators or the performance targets and indicators not being useful, or the underlying records. There might be challenges with the underlying records, sometimes the reliability of the underlying records, and also some of the information might in certain instances not agree to the performance that has been reported by these various municipalities in their report on predetermined objectives. Next slide, please. So with the third area that we're looking at normally as an Auditor General relates to non-compliance, or the compliance area in relation to legislation. And here, once again, we basically look at various areas, of which the most common area, or the biggest area that we focus our attention on, is procurement and contract management. So you would notice, for those areas that we've audited, that we had basically for procurement and contract management, we had some 33% of our findings in the area of compliance relates to procurement and contract management, while 22% relates to the prevention of irregular expenditure. Now, specifically for supply chain management, Chairperson, the areas that we had the findings, or the most common areas where we had findings, relates basically to the area of quotations, but adjudications not properly constituted, and procurement from suppliers did not have their tax matters, or they couldn't provide tax clearance certificates. So those were the most common areas in the area of supply chain management where we had findings. So in terms of the irregular expenditure, here we're just indicating that the annual irregular expenditure for the period under review was 1.4 billion, basically incurred by 26 of the municipalities. And finally on this slide, at that stage, we were saying when we published that the irregular expenditure was though not complete, and it was basically as it was disclosed in the financial statements of the municipalities. Next slide. So what is the overall message that we as an office basically putting out to oversight and to the municipalities in the province? And that is to state that there's been an improvement, but there is still concerns that remains, and specifically in the area of supply chain management. So there is good financial accounting controls, as we've observed from the audit of the financial statements, but there is inadequate preventative controls in the area of supply chain management, because many of the municipalities that we've been auditing, many of them had maybe unqualified financial statements, but then in the area of supply chain management, we would find non-compliance as indicated in the previous slides, which would then prevent that municipalities to be in the green category, or the unqualified with no findings category. So that is our overall message to oversight and the municipalities within the province. So, Chairperson, this slide just speaks to the amended legislation that influenced the audit process of the Auditor General. You would recall that the President of the Republic of South Africa signed this amended legislation into force on the 1st of April 2019, and it relates mainly to the implementation of the material irregularity process. And this mainly relates to where we've identified non-compliance during the audit process, which basically then results in a financial loss, misuse or loss of a public resource, or perhaps substantial harm to the public, or to a public sector institution, or the public in general. This we started to audit in that period. And what the slide also indicates, Chairperson, is the options that the Auditor General has in relation to material irregularities and how, if the material irregularity has been confirmed, how it is to be dealt with. And first of all, the first one you would notice there on the left-hand side in terms of dealing with material irregularity is when the Auditor General has identified perhaps a suspected material irregularity that needs perhaps further confirmation and further processes to happen and further investigations to be done, the Auditor General might refer that material irregularity to another public sector body that, like the SIU or the Hawks, to investigate and confirm the material irregularity further. So that's the one process that the Auditor General has, where the Auditor General feels that that material irregularity would be better handled in the ambit and within the mandate of that particular public sector body. The second part of this material irregularity process relates to recommended actions and taking the binding remedial action. So how this happens is when an accounting officer has been notified of a material irregularity and hasn't perhaps performed, or the Auditor General comes subsequently and the accounting officer has indicated maybe in his response to that notification that he's going to implement certain actions to address the material irregularity, and perhaps the accounting officer hasn't implemented that action, and the Auditor General has confirmed that the action hasn't been implemented satisfactorily, then the Auditor General can make recommendations in the audit report as to what recommended actions the accounting officer should implement. And if the accounting officer then still fails to implement that recommended actions, it then the Auditor General has then a further action that the Auditor General can implement, and that is to issue binding remedial actions for failure to implement the recommendations. And that all happens in the audit report of that specific entity. It will be published in the audit reports, but it doesn't have to wait for the audit report to be implemented. It will be made public in the audit report. And if that binding remedial action is further not implemented, then the final action that the Auditor General can take is to issue a certificate of debt on the accounting officer for failure to implement the remedial actions that the accounting officer has been requested to implement. Next slide, please. So in terms of the identification of material irregularities, this is just a national picture, Chairperson, of the material irregularities that has been identified on a national level, basically for municipalities. And you would see in 67 cases, the municipal managers has been notified of the MIs, or the material irregularities as we call them, and then which results in estimated financial loss of about 1.7 billion. And you would notice here, Chairperson, once again, that the biggest area where material irregularities surfaces is basically in the areas of procurement and contract management and payments, and in the area of interest and penalties, revenue management, investments and assets. And specifically in the area of procurement, it's obviously relating to pricing of goods and services, or goods and services that hasn't been received but payments has been made for it. Interest and penalties mainly relates to the fact that many municipalities don't pay their bills on time, which means they incur then interest or penalties for that matter in relation to obligatory payments that they, for example, have to make to the South African Revenue Services. And then the other two categories relates to revenue management, where they didn't bill revenue, and then debts that's not being recovered. And then the last category would be investments that's not within the requirements or not in accordance with the requirements, compliance requirements, and then assets not safeguarded. So those are just an overview of the national material irregularities that has been identified throughout South Africa for municipalities. Within the Western Cape specifically, the Office of the Auditor General in the Western Cape has identified 2 material irregularities for a municipality within the Western Cape, and that specifically relates to basically payments in excess of contract amounts. That's basically what it relates to. The accounting officer has been notified about these 2 material irregularities. The accounting officer has also responded with actions that the accounting officer is going to implement in relation to the irregularities. And with this ensuing MFMA cycle, the audit team will then go back to assess whether the actions that's been proposed by the accounting officer in the accounting officer's response, if the accounting officer has implemented that proposed actions, and whether the audit office is satisfied that those proposed actions will address the material irregularities that has been identified. Next slide, please. So, Chairperson, we also had some real-time audits that was conducted during the past MFMA cycle due to the pandemic that the country and the world, for that matter, was experiencing. And this relates basically to the, the reallocations of budgets to fight the pandemic within the various municipalities. What has happened basically is that in some instances, funds were reprioritized from equitable share or conditional grants. And basically what this slide indicates is the reprioritization of those funds and how much money that has been spent. So the top portion of the slide would just give you an indication of a picture that's basically from a national perspective, in relation to the spend that has happened. There was a number of reprioritization of grants, and how much of the money has been actually spent by the municipalities to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So within the Western Cape, in relation to these audits, there were about 4 municipalities selected within the Western Cape for this COVID-19 audit, and it's listed there. It's the City of Cape Town, George, and the Matikama municipalities. And as indicated before, that real-time audits has been performed by our teams, our audit teams. The remaining auditees and the expenditure will basically be audited in this new MFMA cycle that we are moving towards, or that we are moving into now for the 2020-21 period that we are auditing. And so we will continue with our audit in relation to the COVID-19 expenditure. In terms of limitations, we haven't experienced any limitations in this regard. And with basically the audit was well received by many by the municipalities that we audited, and we received their cooperation, Chairperson. So the COVID-19 findings that we had is listed on the slide, and you would notice that in this case, Chairperson, there was a number, about 3 areas that we reported, and that is for the City of Cape Town, where 11 million was spent on a shelter for refugees at Wingfield, and these services were provided. That's normally provided by the Department of Home Affairs. Actually falls outside the mandate of the City of Cape Town, and there was no specific agreement entered into by the City of Cape Town with the Department of Home Affairs in relation to the recovery of the cost that the city has incurred in this regard. And then there was the provision and the filling of water tanks, where we've indicated during the COVID-19 pandemic that we visited some of the sites where these water tanks were, and it was noted that some of the water tanks we visited was basically there wasn't water in those tanks, or they were not filled up on a daily basis as originally planned. And then the last part of the findings that we had in relation to this COVID-19 findings was where the municipality basically paid inflated prices for temporary shelters in the area of Strandfontein. This was when we compared how much the city has paid for those shelters during those pandemic compared to what they've paid for other shelters of a similar nature. So there was an excess of prices paid in that regard. Next slide, please. So this next slide is just, in terms of the contribution that we as an audit office make in terms of improving local government outcomes. And it gives you an overview of what we basically are trying to do from an audit office to strengthen local government. And some of these engagements includes status of records reviews, where we follow up with municipalities on the actions that they implement to address some of the root causes that we have identified during audits, and to see if those actions are credible and whether municipalities are actually, in fact, exercising oversight of over the implementation of those action plans. We try and make municipalities aware of the benefits of preventative controls. We also have tried to have impactful engagement with municipal stakeholders, management. Where necessary, we attend impact meetings, council meetings where necessary, to make, to basically add to the value add that the Auditor General is giving in terms of municipal governance, except for the audit reports that we are producing. Next slide. I think we come to the end. Yep. So what is the overall message that we as an audit office want to give to oversight and to the municipalities at large? And that is basically, we're saying that the tone at the top is critical. Ethical leadership, service orientation, good governance and accountability. And that goes actually hand in hand with the next recommendation, which relates to capacitate and stabilize administration, and emphasis may be free from political interference and changes. Because if you have political instabilities at municipalities, we found that the administration of that municipalities is not in a good space, which means the municipality the internal control environment at that municipalities becomes dysfunctional, and in the end, the service delivery to the communities in those municipalities are actually suffering in the end. So those two are very critical ones, the stability of leadership at the top and the tone of that leadership. And then the third point there, enabling and insisting on a strong control environment with practical, automated, and routinely executed internal controls that prevents financial loss, wastage, and transgressions. So that point actually indicates what I spoke about earlier, Chairperson, is the municipalities that's in the unqualified with no findings audit outcome category and stays there are municipalities that have their preventative controls institutionalized. Those municipalities that prevent errors and wrongs from happening and identify that before it can happen. Those are the municipalities that stays in that category. And I think that is what we as an audit office are encouraging, is for municipalities to improve in the area of preventative controls, to strengthen those preventative controls as far as possible, to enable them to identify errors or wrongs early on to prevent it. And then finally, where you have had, transgressions happening within your municipal environment, is to first of all to conduct or to investigate those transgressions, and then if there's needs to be held accountable, that we have that accountability measures implemented for where accountability failures has been identified. Next slide. So, Chair, I think that sums up the presentation of the Auditor General to this committee. Once again, thank you for this opportunity, and I think we are more than willing to take questions from members of this committee. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Alkes, for the presentation. Just opening remark is that it's good to know that there is improvement amongst our municipalities in terms of sound and prudent financial management, but in certain instances there were regression, and we will speak to those municipalities where those regression occurred. But I'm going to open the floor to members to pose questions for clarity and whatever remarks they would like to make. And then I will also, have a question or two that we could address. I recognize Honourable van der Westhuizen, Honourable van der Westhuizen and Honourable Maseko in that order. So I'm going to give the floor to you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. You are welcome to pose your questions or whatever remarks you'd like to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I do hope you can hear me well. I've been struggling with terribly this morning with changing or internet speeds. I've been doing some speed tests and it's been terrible this morning, despite the fact that I'm on 5. Thank you so much. Chair, can I first just say thank you very much to the Auditor General. I think the work of the Auditor General as an Article 9 entity in this country has been really sterling and has been, really a light in the last almost 25 years. And I'm really grateful. And these reports, I want to assure the Auditor General's representatives that we take these reports extremely seriously and we learn from them. And we really want to say thank you very much for all the hard work that goes into this. And please keep that in mind when I make my following remarks. The first one is, Chair, I'm surprised by a number of facts that we've been presented with here this morning, to put it mildly. The first one is on slide number 5. There are two things that worry me. The first one is that the municipal expenditure for the 2019-2020 financial year is stated there as 73 billion. Now, Stats South Africa previously reported that the expenditure of municipalities, which by the way exceeded the income of municipalities, that is now for the whole of South Africa, was more than 80 billion rand. So again, either there's been a sharp decline between 2018 to the 2019-2020 year, or this figure needs to be looked at carefully. Then the second thing which surprises me about this same slide is the fact that only 1% of municipalities received audit reports that were qualified with findings, and then 1% disclaimed with findings, so that 98% were unqualified, be it with or without findings. Whereas also in the 2019 year, COCTA, the National Department of Cooperation and identified 87 so-called dysfunctional municipalities and deployed teams to those municipalities to try and assist them. I'm sitting here with an official website, cocta.gov.za, of the 23rd of May 2018, where it says Minister Zweli Mkhize announced a list of 87 priority municipalities that were identified as distressed or dysfunctional, requiring urgent intervention. Now, my experience has been that, even with external intervention, it still doesn't speak to the problems as identified, and I think quite rightly, by this report that we've been served with this morning, which says that, you need stable, ethical leadership at the top, because the leadership didn't change to that extent or didn't improve as far as my knowledge goes between 2018 and 2019. So I'm just wondering if Mr. Aukers could just perhaps help us with those percentages, because I honestly find it extremely, it must be extremely good news if 98% of municipalities in South Africa got unqualified audit results, although I must say, Chair, that it doesn't quite match what we've been, the picture that's been created up to now. And then secondly, Chair, I think if we look at the next one, number 6, it absolutely affirms what Mr. Aukers has said, that all those municipalities that regressed, be it Cederberg, be it Kannaland, be it Beaufort West, saw a change in leadership, saw some instability. So I think it's something that I do hope also our voters will take into account to see if you can keep your municipality stable and if you can vote for ethical leadership, just how important that is. And then, Chair, in terms of the findings, in terms of, for example, the water tanks that were not filled on a daily basis as reported, and I think it's wonderful that our audit reports are also now looking wider than that. Perhaps, and I'm going to propose that when we get to our resolutions for this morning, that we again look at these aspects, because some of them, as well as the inflated prices, are quite worrisome, but that we perhaps, I want to ask of Mr. Aukers at this stage, if you say the water tanks were not filled up daily as originally planned, was that a contractual obligation from a private contractor that failed? Was it, a breach of contract, or was it just that, originally planned may have been a little bit optimistic? And does it mean that those people were without water, or was there another tank, 100 meters away from that? I think it's important for us to know what were the standards of service delivery. I can imagine that it'd be quite ambitious to fill up a number of water tanks when we don't even know how many of those tanks have been there. And the same, Chair, if we could get a little bit more information regarding the city's response to the findings of the inflated prices paid. Because as I know, normally there's a lot of communication between the auditors and the entity to be audited, in which the entity to be audited will be given an opportunity to respond to the auditor's initial impressions. So if you could just give us a little bit more information regarding that communication. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Van der Westhuizen. Honourable Maseko, I recognize you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And again, let me echo my colleagues' words of appreciation to the Auditor General with quite more details detailed presentation about these audit outcomes. And I think member already covered me with some of the question. The one that I want to maybe look at on slide 21, if I can find out from the Auditor General, one of the message there is the to capacitate and stabilize administration free from political interference and changes. I think most of the time we see the issue of the free from political interference. And I always ask myself that in the municipalities, how do they get that balance? Because you will find you've got a ward councillor and there is a project that is coming in that Ward 1. I'm just making an example. And you will find that the accountability from the community is with the councillor and have to get the information. So when we do oversight, you'll hear that councillors are saying, but officials have said to us that no, we mustn't say anything about this, is the responsibility and. Now, that being said, you take it that there's no political interference when something like that happens. But the balance from the community, when is it political interference per the audit outcomes, when is not the political interference? Because to me is, I always feel the political representatives have to have the information from the officials, and there is this shield that sometimes the officials they use and say no, that is political interference. Even sometimes it's trying to get information for you to go and give the report to your communities. So I'm trying to find out that what is it that the AGF identified that they can put that in the message of the, if the municipality is free from political interference, that we can, or changes that we can have an example of that to make sense to that statement. Again, for the municipalities maybe that have regressed, the Cederberg, Canaland, and Beaufort West, to what an extent maybe if AG can say the political instability or interference or changes have played role in that. And I'm asking this because of, to me, if it is about, for example, the 3 codes that had to happen in supply chain management and the municipality didn't do that, it was not the political interference, it has to do with the officials. Now I'm trying to get answers for us, especially from the side of the scoper, to get the balance of, are we looking at the right direction if we want to be proactive, that we don't get the municipalities that regress? And to what an extent is the Auditor General also helping us to be proactive, and the Auditor General's office also being proactive to also nip the problem from the bud as it tries to crop up from the onset? Because when you look at the money that should have been used for service delivery somewhere else, it's quite worrisome for such small things that should have happened. And I'm not talking about the Western Cape only, I'm talking Auditor General as a whole within the country. So if we can get just the analysis of this political interference, how do you hold the officials accountable as a political representatives to get the right answers right on time before MS has happened? That will be really appreciated from my side. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Ms. Seko. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Orkut just to address those questions, and then afterwards, and I'll try to clean up wherever needs to be cleaned up that hasn't been addressed. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair.
Yes, sorry, Honourable van der Westhuizen, I see your hand. Thank you. Please proceed.
My apologies. That's a correction from my side, Chair. In terms of Stats SA, the quarterly expenditure of municipalities is in the order of between 70 and 80 and even up to 88 billion rand, and that is again a figure obviously of 2018. So that 73 billion, perhaps, you know, Mr. Olkers would just be able to clarify whether that is just referring to the Western Cape, because I understood at the time that he said that was a figure for South Africa. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Hanwesen. Mr. Olkers, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I will just get my technical team to confirm the figure of the 73 billion. Yeah, we will just get that confirmation, Chair. But I think I want to start, first of all, with the answer the questions of Member Maseko, before I get to Mr. van der Westhuizen's questions. With regards to the political interference and the free from political interference, Chairperson, I think the legislation has been written in such a way, you know, that governs municipalities has been written in such a way that there is clear rules as to when, you know, what the roles of council is and members of council, and what the rules for the administration is. I can just maybe perhaps give an example. For example, when you have procurement and contract management, that process has to be free from political interference. So whether you know, adjudicate a tender, or you know, and that for roads or housing to happen, or sanitation works, etc. That whole process has to be free from political interference. So in one municipality about a year or so ago, we've identified that certain municipality had a committee set up of councillors that oversaw that the tender process, the adjudications and so forth. They had some sorts of influence over that. So that is a clear example where we identified where there was political influence over the you know, the adjudications, and or where there was influence over the procurement and contract management processes within that municipality. So that is an example where we've then basically indicated that there has been influence, political influence in that area of procurement and contract management when it came to councillors. So there is examples of that, and it's indicated if we have that scenario, then you would normally have a situation where there's non-compliance and the resultant irregular expenditure in relation to that political interference. And we find it mostly in the area of procurement and contract management. That is where there is political influence and interference identified in that particular area. And also, Chairperson, where there's regular changes of the administration, whether that's the municipal manager, the CFO, and so forth, that might also, although you won't be able to link it directly to political interference, but that will create political or administrative instability within the administration at municipalities. And when we find that instability at municipalities, basically what happens in those scenarios is the audit outcomes or the internal control environment within the municipality creates space for internal control failures and so on, which means that, you know, there will be resultant non-compliance at that municipality and so forth. Or you would find that there's limitations at the municipality because of the constant changes in the administration, municipal managers changing over at a regular basis. That would create instability at municipalities. So those are just an example of sort of what we saw at municipalities in relation to political interference. In terms of the specific municipalities in relation to Cederberg, Kannaland, and Beaufort West, I don't think I want to go into the specifics of those municipalities because I think it has been there for everybody to see. The media reports regularly on those municipalities where there's issues in relation to, municipal managers that has been changed, or there's perhaps influences in terms of, irregular expenditure that comes out of these processes. So I don't want to go into the specifics of those municipalities in relation to that. But there has been political instability with regards to those municipalities, which spills over to the administration in that municipalities, which then influence the internal control environment at that municipalities, which relates then or which impacts the audit outcome of those municipalities. I hope I've covered that questions of Member Maseko. Then in terms of Member van der Westhuizen, basically, in relation to the expenditure, I will give over to my colleague to maybe correct in terms of the statistics in relation to the spending at national level versus a provincial level. But in terms of the water tanks and the contractual obligations that relates to that, basically what we've indicated there is that there was an obligation that the water tanks had to be filled on a daily basis. So that whether that was a contractual obligation from a contractor that had to be performed by the City of Cape Town or underneath the guidance of the City of Cape Town or by the City of Cape Town itself, that had to be done. The city had to basically oversee that process in terms of its contract management processes. It wasn't done. And so there's been failure that's been identified. So the city will have to follow up. If there was a contractor involved, they would have to manage that contractor to make sure that, the water tanks are filled. Or if it's the cities did it themselves, they would then have to take appropriate actions against the responsible officials. So that's the answer I want to give to that one. In terms of the inflated prices, what was the city's response? We have communicated with the city as regards the inflated prices. The city undertook, in terms of our notification, to basically investigate it. They have instituted a forensic investigation into that inflated prices. And we, as I've indicated to the committee before, Chairperson, we will basically follow up during this ensuing MFMA cycle that whether the actions, the forensic reports or the forensic actions that the City of Cape Town has undertaken, whether those forensic reports are available, whether the city has in fact instituted the recommendations, maybe perhaps coming out of those forensic reports, and further actions that the city has taken perhaps against officials and so on. So we have received notification, as I've indicated, or correspondence from the accounting officer, indicating that they are instituting this forensic process, and we will follow it up during the MFMA cycle. I will then just, in terms of slide, the stats SA slide, I will hand over to my colleague that was more closely involved in relation to the preparation of the slide. I think it's Sunil.
Thank you, Mr.
Chair.
Yes, Mr. Hari Prashad.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to give clarity, the 73 billion relates to the expenditure budget for the municipalities in the Western Cape only. I don't have the information from a national perspective at hand, but the 73 billion is only related to the municipalities in the Western Cape.
And just to follow up on that clarification, those percentages as presented, they relate to Western Cape municipalities and not national municipalities.
Correct, yes. It's a relationship between the outcome and the expenditure budget for Western Cape.
Thank you, Mr. Hari Prashad. Colleagues, you have any follow-up questions you'd like to ask? Were you satisfied that your questions were adequately addressed? I have Honourable Maseko and Honourable van der Westhuizen in that order.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I just want to find out another question from the Auditor General. In Western Cape's municipalities, to what an extent compared to other provinces, the dependency on other public bodies, and also if there is the percentage, maybe you can indicate the percentage that the municipalities in Western Cape, are they too dependent on other public bodies when coming to the information? And if that's the case, to what an extent, maybe the percentage, if you can indicate, if it's not possible to tell us in detail. And the other one, it will be one of the root causes that were indicated to us that was identified for the material irregularity was the senior managers and other officials of the municipalities exercising financial management responsibility did not take all reasonable steps within their respective areas of responsibility to ensure contracts are managed efficiently. And I want to find out from you, do you foresee that being remedied in future? And if that's the case, how do you see that rolling out to make sure that there is something that, and I know you will refer me back to the policies that are there in the municipalities, but when we talk about the practicality of the repeat problematic municipalities, it's not business as usual. Surely we need to say, how do we go about in being proactive, because at the end, the communities in those municipalities are the ones that are suffering. So I want to sort of grab the knowledge from you, AG. Much as the policies are there, there is transgression that is happening. How do we go about to empower those municipalities? For those, it can't be the whole municipalities, it's like that, but what is it that we can do to try to deal with these municipalities that again and again are the ones that are not giving joy to their communities? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Seko. Honorable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, thank you very much for clarifying that. And I think we're on the same page now in terms of slide number 5. But I would appreciate it if the Auditor General's representatives could just give us a comparative picture of how our Western Cape municipalities compare to that in the remainder of South Africa. Because you know everything is relative. And I've been under the impression that the Western Cape municipalities have actually done extremely well in the past when compared to that of other provinces, and that our provincial Department of Local Government and the support that between them and our provincial Department of Finance and Economic Development, that that support is really reflecting in the higher quality of audit results in the Western Cape. But perhaps for us to get a better understanding of what we have in front of us, I think such a comparison would be most helpful and would really be able to inform us from our oversight role that we need to play over the departments and the provincial administration, that whether the performance of the departments is up to standard, and whether the Western Cape is not doing as well as we might believe that our provincial government is doing, because our oversight is in the first instance over the provincial departments and the support that they are giving to our local governments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable van der Westhuizen. Mr. Olkers, I'm just going to hand back to you. just to respond to those questions, then I will pose my questions because they haven't been covered yet. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chairperson, for those questions. In relation to Honourable Member van der Westhuizen question in relation to how does municipalities compare in the Western Cape to other municipalities, the Auditor General on an annual basis for both municipalities and for departments do publish the general report for the entire country. And I'm not sure if Mr. van der Westhuizen or Honourable Member van der Westhuizen has got a copy of the general report that has been tabled by the Auditor General for municipalities. If not, then I will arrange for Honourable van der Westhuizen to get a copy of the general report of the Auditor General in relation to the outcomes for municipalities right across South Africa. So it's all the 250, I think it's 252 municipalities that we're having right across. So all the audit outcomes will be in the MFMA general report. Okay. And if I move to Honourable Maseku's questions, the question relating to the extent of dependency on bodies, I'm not 100% sure to which specific bodies Honourable Maseku is referring, but if the Honourable Member is referring to, for example, bodies in relation to administrative processes, like, for example, the preparation of financial statements, I think we have, touched on that, where we given in the one slide an overview of the cost of consultants in the preparation of financial statements. And it's indicated there that the municipalities in the Western Cape, so about 20 municipalities, the financial services that was provided to them was about 30 million in relation to consultants, consultant expenditure. So if it's in relation to that, then that is an overview of the extra, apart from the salary cost or the salary bill for the municipalities in the Western Cape. The 30 million is in relation to consultants over and above the salary bill for municipalities. Then in relation to the steps that's been taken and officials and how do the members keep municipalities accountable in relation to that. I think, Chairperson, the steps with regards to the MI process, that steps we will only be able to confirm if the particular municipality has implemented and taken action against the relevant officials once we arrived for our 2020-2021 audit cycle in relation to specifically the MIs that was raised at the municipality for the contract management, the contract management issues that we've identified at those particular municipalities. And here, it's basically, in relation to what can be done is what we as an audit office encourage oversights and specifically from maybe councils and so on, and from oversight is for municipalities, first of all, to draft a credible action plan. And the credibility of the action plan needs to be assessed, at the various oversight levels as well. And then to check whether maybe on a quarterly basis, whether the actions that has been implemented in relation to that action plan, whether there's been any progress made in relation to those actions, the undertakings by the officials, whether there's been any progress made in relation to what they said they're going to do and has been done. And I think if you have that process implemented and inquiring about the action plans and the actions that's been taken by officials, and they have to report to oversight in relation to that actions, then oversight from their side can keep the officials, accountable in relation to, you said you're going to implement this, you haven't done this, why is it not being done? Please explain what is needed, etc., etc. So that is the kind of mechanisms that we encourage, oversight to adopt, is for officials and for municipalities and so forth to report to their oversight or their councils and so on a regular basis as to what was my shortcomings, this is the actions that I've undertaken to do, and this is how far I have progressed with my actions that I've undertaken to do, Chairperson. So that is my answers to those questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Alkes, for your response. I don't think members want to have an immediate follow-up, or shall I then proceed with some of the questions I'd like to present. Honourable van der Westhuizen. Immediate follow-up?
Yes, thank you. Only a follow-up, or may I follow up in what Mr. Alkes just said?
Yes, or anything new also would be okay.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Chair. Chair, I think I've been privileged to be a member of the National Assembly. I believe you yourself at the time when we heeded the call from the Auditor General, who said that we have all the legislation, and we report and we find certain irregularities, etc. But there's a lack of action, and people are not being held accountable. And then we changed the legislation, and I think Mr. Alkes also referred to the fact that the President signed off on this some 2-3 years ago. But it seems to me as if that action that from the Auditor General has not really been implemented, that there's not really been action, that people are not really being held accountable. And perhaps if Mr. Alkes would be so kind just to tell us, to what extent have they used the tools that are, in my mind now, available to the Auditor General to pursue matters further than just a report that is like a red flag that is being raised. So to what extent have you taken that what you call binding remedial action for failure to implement recommendations? It seems to me just as if the process is just too slow. And the fact that we are sitting in August 2021 and we're looking at the audit results from transactions which took place 2 years ago and even more than 24 months ago, it just seems to me a bit problematic. So would there be an option for the Auditor General to respond quicker and harsher when they do find that there have been irregularities? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen, and may I use this opportunity to invite welcome Honourable Makamba Boycha, who joined our meeting late due to an emergency on her part. If Honourable Makamba Boycha would like to ask a question, she can just indicate as to when she's ready to pose any questions. I recognize Honourable Maseku. You have the floor, Honourable.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, just a quick one. I just want to find out from the AG, after the audit outcomes, how long does it take for the AG to issue the debt certificate to accounting officers if there is the debt certificate that has to be issued for the consequence management from the AG side? Thank you, Chair.
Can you just repeat that, because we've lost you for a moment?
Okay. I was just asking, Chair, after the audit outcomes of the municipalities, if there is where the municipality or the accounting officer have to receive a debt certificate because of the irregularity and the outcome coming from the consequence management from the AG side, they feel that has to be issued. That period takes how long from the process of issuing out, from the process of the audit outcomes until they can say now they're going to issue that certificate to Mr. X who is the MM in the municipality X.
Okay, thank you, Honourable Mashego. Mr. Aukus, if you wish to respond to those two inputs, the floor is yours.
Once again, thank you, Chair, for that questions. I'd really appreciated the questions. I think the Honourable Van Westhuizen's questions around the accountability and the implementation of the material irregularity process, Chairperson. Chair, this is a fairly new process, and we didn't go a big bang approach as an office by implementing the MI process at all our government entities and departments and so on, or for all government auditees in that first year. We only implemented it at some, I think it was about 16 auditees where we implemented the material irregularity process initially. And that process entailed those entities and departments where they had a significant or a material amount or a big amount of irregular expenditure. And that is where we basically identified that these are the entities or departments that we're going to implement that approach of a material or identifying or the audit approach in relation to material irregularities. For the next year, then we expanded the implementation thereof to about 89 auditees subsequent to that, if my memory serves me now correct. And so we continuously increasing the number of auditees on an annual basis until we get to full implementation of the material irregularity process at all the departments and entities on a national basis. But yeah, I think we should also appreciate that, you know, with any legal process, and this is one of those, it takes a bit of time because you need to be fair to the, you know, to the people that's involved in this process. So if we identify a material irregularity during an audit, we first of all have to communicate it to the accounting officers and then receive their first response. That is just part of the normal audit process. And once we've received their response and evaluated their response, and we are satisfied that we know that this might be a material irregularity, we as an audit office then have to issue a notification to the accounting officer, indicate to the accounting officer that this is a material irregularity. The accounting officer must then again get an opportunity to respond to the notification that the Auditor General has issued to that accounting officer with actions that the accounting officer is going to implement to address the material irregularity. Subsequent to that, there's further processes that happens where the auditors will have to go back to see what the accounting officer has done in relation to the actions that is undertaken in his letter or his response to the AG, and assess that. If that is then, there's no satisfaction in relation to that, then the audit office will have to assess the next step, which can be remedial action that the audit office would recommend, and then give the accounting officer again a chance to to implement the remedial action. If the accounting officer then doesn't implement the remedial action, then the AG will have to then assess whether the AG is going to take, not remedial, sorry, I must take a step back, make recommendations, sorry, Chairperson. The AG first has to make recommendations in relation to the actions that the accounting officer has to take if the Auditor General is not satisfied with the accounting officer's actions. Once that recommendations of the Auditor General has been assessed and it's been assessed that it's not been implemented or it has, then we have to take the next process, and that is to take binding remedial action. And once that binding remedial action is failing, only then can we go to the process of issuing a certificate of debt. Now, if you just look at the process, it's not a quick process that it is going to take, because in all of this, you need to be fair to the accounting officer. You need to allow the accounting officer, in terms of law, you need to allow the accounting officer the time to respond in relation to this whole process. Because if we don't follow all the steps properly as an audit office in relation to this process, if the accounting officer takes us to court, they will just kick us out of court and say, but you haven't been procedurally fair to this accounting officer. So that is the whole process that we need to follow, to tick all the boxes in terms of fairness in relation to this process, to make sure that we don't transgress the law in terms of when it comes to accounting officers being granted an opportunity to respond to this irregularities that has been identified to the by the Auditor General. And I think that is just, and then we can maybe again speak to the committee if they so request, to give them a proper overview of how the MI process is working, Honourable Chair. And I think we will be more than willing to do that, but it is a time-consuming process. In terms of Member Maseko's question in relation to the certificate of debt, this is also part of that process. So that will also be variable, because the final the person that determines whether a certificate of debt is going to be issued after recommendations has been received by an internal committee is the Auditor General. So the Auditor General makes that final determination whether the accounting officer is going to receive a certificate of debt or not. And that we can't determine. There is a time span, perhaps there will be a number of days that the Auditor General will have to apply his or her mind to the fact that, you know, after the recommendations has been received from this internal committee, whether the certificate of debt is going to be issued or not. And the Auditor General then is at that make that final determination. So to put a number of days on that specific time frame in terms of when that certificate of debt is going to be issued, it's a bit difficult to do that. But safe to say that the Auditor General has to make public, or has to inform the accounting officer, to of that determination within a reasonable time, I would, in relation to the certificate of debt, because it can't be a situation where the certificate of debt is kept back, or the decision in relation to the certificate of debt is kept back indefinitely from an accounting officer, Chairperson. So that is my answers in relation to those questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Alkes. So I'm going to just pose a few questions myself. I not in particular order in terms of the presentation of the slides, but I'd like to pose the first question, and that relates to local government finances. But before I pose any of the questions, I appreciate the cautiousness in which you have presented this general overview of the audit outcomes of our municipalities. There's been a lot of generalities. You'd be very cautious in terms of being more specific in terms of municipalities are concerned, except possibly the municipality or the city of Cape Town in terms of the COVID relief expenditure, but I'll come back to that. My first question relates to the municipalities using the equitable share to finance operating expenditure, particularly paying councillor salaries and other employee salaries, and that leaves us with less money for infrastructure development and maintenance, etc. And that's regrettable. So my question I'd like to ask in relation to that is, we know that this report that you're presenting to us today is prior to the onset of the pandemic, and with the levels of unrecoverable debts that's been so high previously, one can only but imagine the magnitude of that sort of percentage now that many people have experienced economic hardship due to loss of jobs, unable to pay their service accounts, etc. Now, I'd like to know whether you have sort of detected the correlation between inward migration into the Western Cape and the pressures it places on municipalities to deliver services, and very often the inward migration often people who seek better economic opportunities, who are in many respects not able to pay for municipalities. It contributes to the inability of municipalities to meet their financial commitments. That's one question. The second question it relates to the cost of consultants. Now, 30 million rand as a percentage, which you have sort of provided to us in relation to the total cost of 809 million rand, seems to be quite a lot in percentage term, which is 4%. But in relation to the number of municipalities who, with the exception of perhaps 3 larger municipalities in Western Cape, is the Metro and Drakenstein and George, that 30 million rand for smaller municipalities to spend on consultants is quite significant in a sense, if it doesn't contribute to the quality of financial reporting that is providing to your office. And perhaps would have been useful if we could possibly have had a breakdown of those municipalities and the costs that they have spent on municipalities in terms of assisting them to draw up their financial statements and reports for audit purposes. Then furthermore, given the regression in certain municipalities, and it is listed in one of the slides, at every year when you draw up your financial, your audit reports, you issue management with a management report where you highlight the shortcomings that you have identified and the corrective steps and measures that need to be put in place to prevent it from reoccurring. In your experience, in terms of having gone through this cycle, and you've gone through many cycles, to what extent is there a seriousness on the part of management to take your management report serious in terms of, improving the financial environment in which it operates and the internal controls, etc. And that brings, I want to link that also with impacts, where impact is an external audit committees are strong. Is there a link between those two oversight bodies in terms of the improvement in terms of the financial sort of and audit outcomes for a particular municipality? Then furthermore, Mr. Aukers, you have stated in terms of irregular expenditure, and we are at Eden that irregular expenditure does not necessarily equate with fraud and corruption, but you have stated there's an amount of 1.4 billion rand and still counting. It would have been useful for us as a committee to have had a breakdown on the municipality and the irregular expenditure and the reasons for those irregular expenditure, because very often, you have a use contract whereby there's a small element of a local content not being sort of complied with, and the whole contract price is then deemed as an irregular expenditure, and we don't have that information. So, but just by the face of it, it looks sort of horrific that we have in the Western Cape irregular expenditure of 1.4 billion rand and still counting, without having a proper context in which that irregular expenditure occurred. Then furthermore, in terms of the material irregularities of 9 million rand that you have, highlighted. Now, material irregularities, 9 million rand, it's a lot of money, but certainly would again be useful if we had known which municipalities have sort of been singled out in terms of having that sort of material irregularities to be addressed. And then lastly, in terms of your COVID report, and I think there is a particular slide where you have your COVID-19 findings, and it's just two, where you state that the City of Cape Town in excessive inflated prices being paid. I think on the second line towards the end, you have the city only obtained a quote from one supplier amounting to 18,101 rand 235 rand per month. I don't know if that is correct, if it is per month or because it's quite excessive for that particular facility that was erected in Strandfontein. And then lastly, Mr. Aukers, in terms of the COVID audit that you've done, you have identified or you audited 4 municipalities, being the City of Cape Town, George, Matsakama and Oudtshoorn. Nothing's been said about those other 3 municipalities. Is it fair to make the assumption that in terms of the audit program that you have sort of followed in those municipalities, that no irregularities were detected? Because in terms of, we know, and it's been in the media and all over the place, that the SIU have identified certain irregularities with regard to the Matsakama COVID expenditure. Thank you, Mr. Olkers. That's all I'd like to state at this stage.
No, thank you, Chairperson, for those questions. Yeah, I just want to start off by the equitable share and the finances in relation to salaries of councillors. I think in that regard, there has been, as indicated in that one particular slide, there has been pressure, on municipalities even before the onset of COVID. COVID just worsened the situation in terms of debt collection, economic pressure in many municipalities. So what we find is because the municipalities struggle with the collection of debt, they have this steady stream maybe of equitable share and grant income that sometimes happens. And what we find within the municipalities, because they struggle to collect debt, they use their equitable share then to make up for that gap that is being created by debt through the debt collection not being done or not debt collection, or the money is not being collected from the debtors. They use to the equitable share to make good for that gap that has been created by the monies not being collected through the debt collection process. So that is basically the trend that we picked up within municipalities in relation to their financial health, which then means that some of the monies can't then be done or is not being used, for the maintenance and other things that municipalities has to do, because they've used this money for paying salaries of the various officials and maybe the councillors. So that's basically what's happened due to the economic strain that communities find themselves within that. In relation to correlation with regards to migration between provinces, Chairperson, there I can only indicate that there will be pressures depending on where that migration happens. We don't have the specifics around it, but from a general perspective or a logical perspective, I think if you have inward migration into your municipal area, people are going to expect to be, delivered services and so on. And so there will be pressure on that in particular municipalities. But as indicated, we don't have the specifics around the Chairperson. But it's something that obviously Stats SA or those kinds of institutions that works with those figures might be more of a better institution to sort of look to answer some of those questions, their reports. And then in terms of consultant expenditure, the breakdown that you've requested from those municipalities, Chairperson, I think we will be able to provide the Chairperson with a breakdown of those consultants' fees, if so requested. But generally speaking, you will find consultants mainly in the smaller municipalities that doesn't necessarily have the infrastructure in terms of their finance units to prepare financial statements. So generally speaking, it will be your more smaller municipalities that would require some consultant assistance in relation to the preparation of their financial statements. The Auditor General is not necessarily against the employment of consultants within municipalities. However, we are for value for money when it comes to, consultants being employed at municipalities. In other words, where consultants do deliver, in relation to the preparation of the financial statements, the value that the municipality is requesting from those consultants, Chair. In terms of our seriousness of the reports and to what our management take our reports seriously, Chairperson, within the Western Cape, I think generally speaking, our reports are being taken seriously by most of the municipalities within the Western Cape. obviously there are municipalities, one or two, or municipalities. And if you look at the previous year's general report, where the AG then indicated there are some municipalities, as he quoted in that general report, where they indicated that they have a maak nie saak nie attitude. In other words, it doesn't matter type of attitude that the AG has quoted in that particular general report. That was the Afrikaans phrase that was quoted in that general report. So, and that you will find those municipalities. There are some municipalities that, would ignore the messages that we send or we communicate to those municipalities. But as an audit office, we continue to engage with those municipalities, to get them on board in terms of taking corrective actions and corrective measures to strengthen their internal control environments as well, and getting them to also move with the trend within the Western Cape, which is, unqualified with no findings, audit outcomes. Chair, then in terms of the impact and so on, and the audit committees, yes, where the audit committees and the impacts are strong in terms of governance, and you have the required skills on those committees, we generally find, Chairperson, that the audit outcomes of those municipalities runs in line with the assurance provided by those audit committees. So you'll generally see for municipalities that has unqualified with no findings, and for municipalities that sits in the unqualified even with findings categories, they normally have very strong audit committees, some of them strong impact committees, which keeps management accountable or within the municipalities in relation to the governance and the administration of those municipalities. So generally speaking, we find that where the audit committees and the impacts are strong, the governance or the administration within those municipalities are strong. And then basically what happens is the municipalities either within the unqualified with no findings categories or in the unqualified with findings categories, but the findings sometimes is not, is maybe it's material findings, but that municipalities is like sort of in and out of the clean audit outcome category as indicated in that movement slide that I have presented, Chairperson. In relation to the municipalities that was singled out for the 9 million, the 9 million that we've identified, the material irregularities. Chairperson, when we started implementing the material irregularity process, it was only at the City of Cape Town that we implemented the MI process at, I think it was about 2 years ago. And last year we expanded it to 6 municipalities, including the City of Cape Town. So it's safe for me to say to the committee that the MI of 9 million, it's actually 2 MIs that we've identified at the City of Cape Town, Chairperson. So the accounting officer for the City of Cape Town has basically responded, instituting the necessary investigations as earlier indicated, and we will follow up. We will basically follow up during this ensuing audit process if we are satisfied with regards to the processes that's been implemented by the City of Cape Town. And then, Chairperson, in relation to the Strandfontein shelter, that finding has been confirmed, Chairperson, in relation to the amounts that has been paid. We've confirmed it with management and we've looked at the supporting evidence and we are satisfied that that finding is correct. And then in terms of the COVID order, nothing has been said about the municipalities that relates to other municipalities, Chair. In relation to that, with regards to the COVID-19 expenditure, we basically only reported mainly what we find at the City of Cape Town. So that is the municipality that we've targeted in because they had the biggest COVID-19 expenditure, and we mainly reported on what has been found at the City of Cape Town. We obviously will then we are aware of the investigations by the SIU into the COVID-19 expenditure at other municipalities like the Matsikama municipality, and we will await their audit outcome or their reports in relation to that expenditure that they've investigated there. But we also look, and we only look at it, we don't look at the complete expenditure, Chairperson, we look at it on a sample basis. But if there's any material findings coming out of those municipalities, we will certainly report that. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Aukus. And lastly, the regular expenditure of 1.4 billion rand and counting. Contextually speaking, can you just address that, please?
Oh, yes. Sorry, Chair. I missed that one. So the regular expenditure is not at all the municipalities that you'll have these 1.4 billion. I think there's about, but we can provide the committee with the breakdown of the regular expenditure. But there is about, I think, between 5-6 municipalities that has the bulk of this irregular expenditure in their financial statements and where it's been identified. But it's not generally material at all the municipalities or big amounts at all the municipalities. You tend to think that the biggest spenders would contribute to the bigger irregular expenditure, but we can also provide the chairperson with a breakdown of those municipalities that had the irregular expenditure. I know in previous years we did include it in the slides, but this year I think we just included the bulk of the irregular expenditure. We didn't isolate it to the specific municipality. Thanks a lot, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Aukus, for that comprehensive response to the questions of the members. I'm going to ask another final round of questions if members wish to, pose additional questions. If not, then we can wrap this up. Honourable van der Westhuizen, I recognize you. Is there any other member who would like to ask a final question or remark? Okay. Honourable van der Westhuizen, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. I started this morning by saying that I really appreciate the work of the Auditor General and that we would have been in a far, far worse situation if it wasn't for the sterling work done by them. And I want to reiterate that. But there is also a matter that does concern me from feedback that I've received, not only from municipalities, but also other public entities such as TVET colleges, etc., that they are concerned about the costs, the financial costs of the audit process. And whether we like it or not, in a sense, that is also a monopolistic situation where, they are not allowed to shop around for the costs incurred by the audit processes of the Auditor General. And my question is just, to what extent has the Auditor General attended to their efficiencies and to the costs that they devolve onto the administrations that they audit? Because I believe, we need always to find a balance between the two processes. And I come from an educational background where at one stage, people overemphasize the whole issue of assessments and not the learning process. And as somebody aptly said, by weighing the baby, you can weigh the baby 3 times a day, but it's feeding the baby that will improve the situation. So every cent spent on auditing could also have been spent on, improved management of the financial situation at the municipality. To what extent do you, as the Auditor General, take note of such comments, and to what extent do you address such comments? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Just my recollection is that most municipalities only pay a fraction of the cost, but I think Mr. Aukus will be better placed to answer that particular question. Mr. Aukus?
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen, for the question. As an audit office, we are certainly aware of the financial pressures that's out there for all our auditees. And it's something that's at the forefront of our considerations when we engage with management of our auditees. And it's something that we take very, very serious because we know the impact thereof, and that in this current economic situation that we find ourselves in, that as Honourable Mr. van der Westhuizen has said, every single cent counts. So in terms of the monopolistic situation, yes, the AG is monopolistic. The situation has been created by the Constitution. And I think there's a specific reason for that, which I don't want to delve into. But there are reasons why the writers of the Constitution regarded created an office such as the Auditor General in terms of Chapter 9 of our Constitution, and for government departments to be audited by the Auditor General or under the guidance of the Auditor General. So that is the situation in terms of the writing of the Constitution. And I think, you know, there are reasons for that. And I think I don't want to delve into that, but there are specific reasons for that. Independence is one of the glaring reasons that comes out of that, objectivity and so forth. And as in terms of the audit outcomes. So therefore, we audit without fear, favor, you know, in relation to outcomes when it comes to government departments. And I think the fact that the Auditor General's mandate has been inscripted into the Constitution just strengthens the hand in terms of independence and objectivity as required in terms of the Constitution. So when it comes to audit fees, Chair, we have been on a trend of reducing audit fees within our province that has put severe pressure on the Office of the Auditor General, because, Chairperson, there is unfortunately a cost to auditing. You have skilled people that's performing these costs, and they have to be paid salaries. And then secondly, there is a framework in terms of which we are auditing. The international standards on auditing is that framework. And that framework requires us at least to perform minimum work in order for us to issue an audit report that is credible to the oversight bodies and to the users of those audit reports. So unfortunately, Chairperson, there is going to be a cost, but we also as an audit office knows that there has to be balance. And that's why we're looking at every single avenue and every single way when we engage with management to see how we can keep our audit costs in check and how we can add value to our auditees at the same time, Chairperson. Chairperson, that's where I want to rest at for the moment. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Olkers, for the response, and I hope it will, to a certain degree, satisfy Honourable van der Westhuizen. It would appear that there are no further questions, Mr. Olkers, to yourself and your team. On behalf of the committee, and I would like to express our heartfelt appreciation for the work you're doing in the province, and the manner in which you engage our municipalities to exercise prudent financial controls and management over public finances, because we know that there's a link between good audit outcomes, good financial management, prudent, management of public finances, and the delivery of services. And for our municipalities in the Western Cape, who consistently over time have done fairly well in terms of the national sort of environment, is for us as a standing committee is heartwarming in the sense that that we can account for the money that we collect from our residents and that we receive from national in terms of equitable share and also MIG funding, whatever the case might be, but also to our department for the role that they play in ensuring that our municipalities are geared and capacitated to do what they're supposed to do and deliver services. And where there are shortcomings, we need to address those shortcomings. And I don't know whether this committee is empowered to summons those municipalities who have regressed in terms of audit outcomes, because the worst outcome you can get is a disclaimer. And our people suffer as a result of the loose and fast manner in which we treat our public finances, and I need to explore that and see whether we as a committee could get those municipalities to come and account to us in terms of how they exercise their financial responsibility in order for them to deliver services. But once again, Mr. Aukers, to you and your team, a job well done. We appreciate your work, we support you, and wherever we can as a committee, to whatever we can do to strengthen your hand, we are most willing and able to do that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. We appreciate your conclusion that you could say.
Thank you, colleagues. Now, Mr. Aukers and the team, we can release you from our meeting if you so wish, as well as the departmental officials. The meeting will proceed because we have some in-house matters that we need to deal with and certain resolutions that we will formulate on the basis of the report and the engagement we've had with you today. So on that note, I'm going to pause for a minute or two to allow you to exit the meeting. Thanks a lot and have a lovely day.
Thank you once again, Honourable Chair, and to the members of the committee, and goodbye and have a good day.
Thank you. And so, colleagues, before we go on with the minutes and the quarterly report, seeing that, I mean, the outcomes is still fresh in our minds, let's just move over to resolutions as quickly as possible and then get that out of the way, and then we just deal with the other two elements of the report. I'll recognize Honourable Maseko.
Chair, thank you very much. Just quickly on the resolutions, I think we have to, like you indicated, we have to engage those municipalities and also engage as we engage with the those municipalities, that means we also have to engage with the city about that outcome also and take it from there. I think in the nutshell, we have to do that before anything else. That's all from me, Chair.
Honourable Seko, are you still with us? Okay.
Can you hear me?
No, yeah, for sure. Now we can.
Okay. No, the resolution I was proposing was just the engagement with those municipalities that have regressed and the one that got the disclaimer, and also for the COVID-19, the PDB to engage also with the city to get the answers on those. Now, the question, it will be, how do we go about, are we going to do it on a one day, or we are going to attend to municipality one municipality at the time. Yes, the city will be, it's a bigger portion, but those municipalities, do we have time to engage on our parliamentary program to do one by one, or we'll have to do it once?
Yeah, thank you. You know, from my personal point of view, because of you know, the pressures that we may have with elections, it would be best if we have the city separately, or perhaps all of those municipalities on one day, even if it means that we will have an extended day. I think it is necessary. But work out with you on the logistics around it, and touch base with the committee to give further input. Okay, Honourable Van der Westhuizen.
Good. Thank you, Chair. I support the idea, because I think we need to get behind the problem and see what can be done. I'm just careful because obviously I don't think those municipalities report to us, the administrations report to their local councils. And what we have oversight over is obviously the provincial departments as the first line entity. So could I propose that we just phrase the invitation to them very carefully, and that we also invite our Department of Local Government in terms so that they could inform us in terms of their interaction with those local municipalities and the support that they are giving, and whether that hand that I hope and trust is being you know, extended to these municipalities, whether that hand is being clapped away, whether that hand has been accepted, you know, where is the problem, and that we ask those municipalities to come and explain to us more in terms of their relation towards the assistance that we expect from our provincial department of local government. Just this a bit of sensitivity in terms of the wording when we invite them to come to us, but that we must invite them, as Honourable Maseko stated. I'm completely in support of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honourable Van der Westhuizen. We have in our program where we will have the department to give us a report in terms of you know, how they're going to deal with the outcomes of the audit report with regard to certain municipalities, and at that particular meeting, then we could possibly do that invitation as well. But in addition to that, what we don't, the department also provided the executive with a report on the state of all the municipalities in the Western Cape, and we need to get that report. You know, as when the department come to us in terms of that particular slot where we're going to deal with the municipal outcomes and what they're going to do about it, we want a report on the state of municipalities, each of the municipalities in the Western Cape, because it will, the two will inform each other and complement each other in terms of what they're doing about it. And then perhaps at that stage, and we can also invite those municipalities to become part of that meeting. I don't know, we just have to discuss it a little further as how we're going to do it. Honourable Maseko.
Thank you, Chair. Another one maybe that I was just thinking now is the issue of the concern, and I don't know if ever we have to deal with that here or in scope of the using the consultants, the exorbitant money that is being paid from municipalities versus the departments that have to deal with those responsibilities. So there is a double payment for the CFOs and also the consultants for that. I don't know, how are we going to attend to that? Are we going to handle it here, or we should direct it towards the scope so that because we are also in Scopa to deal with that side. I don't know how we're going to go about. Thank you, Chair.
No, Mr. Alkes indicated to us that he can give us a breakdown per municipality in terms of the consultant costs. And once we get that report, and then we can make a decision as to whether we're going to refer to Scopa or whether we're going to deal with it ourselves. But let us just resolve to request that breakdown per municipality, and then because all of those sort of blocks will then inform us when we also have those meetings later with municipalities. Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Again, fully support that we get an indication of the costs of consultants, but particularly if we could track the trend in that regard. Every time when there are new regulations, I can imagine that you may need some consultants, but one or other time the knowledge should be taken on by the municipal officials as well. They must learn from the consultants, and we must try not to have a situation where the use of consultants are perpetuated. But can I also, and you will know why I'm asking this, get an indication from our Department of Local Government, even if they can't get a full survey of all municipalities in the Western Cape, of the increases or the changes, let me rather put it that way, in the costs of the incurred, the amounts that they need to pay over to the Auditor General for the work that the Auditor General is doing in auditing those municipalities. And perhaps if we could get the comparative costs over the last 5 years or so, I think it would be valuable, particularly as our municipalities are struggling financially, as the Auditor General's representatives themselves confirmed this morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I just let's just go to the second resolution in terms of the consultants. Could we then ask the Auditor General to provide us with the past 3 financial years instead of just the past financial year? Then we could then monitor the trend that you speak about. Okay. In terms of your second part of the question, in terms of audit costs, I asked a parliamentary question to the Minister of the auditing fees that each municipality paid to the Auditor General, and a breakdown was provided of the previous financial year of the fees, which, as you rightly say, appears to be exorbitant for small municipalities. But in terms of the response that the Minister provided, was that the municipality itself pays only 10% of that cost, and the rest are being paid by the National Cochrane Department. So perhaps I can forward you that question and that response to, instead of us having asking the department, and based on that, and if there need to be a question that need to be asked, as a follow-up, then we can possibly do that. Is that okay?
Please, thank you, Chair. I would appreciate if you could pass that on. But Chair, just as we are concerned about Eskom and 15% tariff increases, above inflationary tariff increases, I think if we could have perhaps a comparison of the costs for our local governments. But the information that you've just shared with us, that the biggest part of that cost is being carried at national level, is extremely valuable. But I think if we could get an indication of the implications of the costs on our local governments over the last 5 financial years, I think that would be, and again, they don't need to come and present in person. If we could perhaps just ask that they give such a report. And that request obviously will come from, we put that request to the Department of Local Government in the Western Cape.
Okay, fine, we can do that. Thanks a lot. And then furthermore, Mr. Alkes will state that it will give us a breakdown of irregular expenditure per municipality, and maybe we will ask for that report, irregular expenditure, say for the past 2 financial year per municipality, if that is in order with you. Okay. Any other resolutions, colleagues, you'd like to us to record? If not, Johan Coetzee, you have that down?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. I've got it. Chair, just to add on to what Member van der Westhuizen said earlier about our oversight role over municipalities and over the department, that is correct. I think you can remember when we had the Chairperson's Forum meeting when Mr. Uys briefed the committee of on the responsibility or the oversight roles that our committees have over national departments. You raised the question about touching on municipalities. So we just need to be sensitive. But I think our session with the department on the 31st of August will clear quite a bit from their presentation. Chairperson, if I may, the question regarding the audit fees for the past 5 years, if I can present that question to the department, then maybe on the 31st they could have maybe just a slide and indicate to the committee. Then we will get that information during that briefing session. Will that be in order?
Okay, we can do that. All the ministers I received to Honourable van der Westhuizen, but that is only in relation to the past not the previous financial year. But we can do that. Thank you, Johan.
Okay.
Colleagues, is there anything else that you'd like to raise? If not, I'm going. Johan?
Can I share the minutes for you, Chair?
No, not yet.
Oh.
Thank you. If there's anything that you might think of, please, by close of business today, you can forward such resolution to Johan, and then we could incorporate it in the minutes. Johan, is that okay with you?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you. Now you may proceed with the minutes, Johan.
I'll share quickly, Chair. Is that visible, Chairperson?
Yes, it's visible, but it's wrong. Oh, there we go now.
Here we go.
Okay, right. Can you just enlarge it a little, Johan? It's the minutes of the 3rd of August. Page 1, the attendance, all members were there. Uncle Moran was there as well. Any additions and corrections on page 1, colleagues? Thank you, Johan. Can you move up? Page 2, any additions or corrections? It was basically just the first quarterly performance report of the municipality in terms of performance and financial sort of expenditure. Okay. Right. So if there's no thank you. If there's no corrections or additions, can I have a seconder for us to adopt the report?
I support.
There's a proposal. Thank you, colleagues. Minutes adopted. Jan, can you do the last part? That is the quarterly report.
There we go.
It's a report from April to June. Okay.
Chairperson, now it doesn't fit so nicely.
Okay, there we go. Right. I think members have received the report beforehand, and I'm sure we have sort of scrutinized the report.
I propose that we adopt, Chair.
As a proposal. So you all in order with the content of the report in terms of your attendance?
Yes, Chair.
Good.
Chair.
Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask if you just look at paragraph 3, where it says departments reporting to the committee, and then it says 2, and then 3.1, Department of Local Government. I think that the 2 may have to change.
Thank you for that observation, Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Yeah, Chairperson, what happened there was, I think we had provincial treasury in there as well, but they're not really our line function department that reports to the committee. And I think when we took treasury out, I elected to change that.
Thanks a lot. Okay, colleagues, there was a proposal and it's seconded with that addition. Honourable van der Westhuizen, thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of the meeting, colleagues, in terms of the agenda. Allow me to thank, yes, Johan?
Chairperson, sorry, just one thing I want to raise to the committee. In terms of the NCOP program, they will be considering the Municipal Systems Amendment Bill. If you remember correctly, we adopted our negotiating mandate in May already. So they're only looking at the negotiating mandates on I think the 24th of August, and I have scheduled Friday the 27th of August for us to just adopt our final mandate, depending on what's the outcome of their meeting. Just for members to be aware of that. I will send out, as soon as I know what the outcome of that meeting is, I will send out the notice.
Yeah, thank you. And it's also on the parliamentary program. Thank you for that.
That's correct.
Thank you, colleagues. Right, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you, Candice. Thank you, Nomfundo. Thank you, Han from Reelen. And Kosinati, thank you so much for being available to us and to assist us wherever we need your assistance. And lastly, thank you, members, colleagues, for being present and your input in today's meeting. And lastly, I could say thanks a lot for putting everything together. Much appreciated. Colleagues, have a lovely day further. It's very cold here in Swellendam, and I need to get a little warm.
Thank you, Chairperson.